J.C. Sandberg. He's the Chief Advocacy Officer at the American Clean Power Association, known as ACP. He leads ACP's state and federal advocacy, legal, and transmission teams. J.C. led the clean energy industry's advocacy around the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as industry efforts to shape the Inflation Reduction Act, implementing rules and regulations. Prior to joining ACP, Sandberg led the global government affairs team and policy team at GE Renewable Energy. In this role, JC was instrumental in the growth of the company's onshore and offshore wind, grid, hydro, and storage businesses. Sandberg played an active role in the establishment of policy and regulatory frameworks enabling the accelerated deployment of renewable energy in domestic and foreign markets. JC began his policy career in 2001 as counsel in the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, where his portfolio included surface transportation, federal government response to the 9/11 attacks, and a range of environmental issues. During his Senate tenure, Sandberg was a lead Senate negotiator on a $300 billion reauthorization of the Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century. Following his work on the Hill, he served in counsel to the law firm Baker Donelson, where he advised clients on energy infrastructure issues. He earned a BS in accounting from Brigham Young University and a JD from the University of Arizona. Had dinner with JC last night, and JC told me the trip to Nebraska, he checked the box on visiting all 50 states in our nation. So let's give JC a big Nebraska welcome. JC Sandberg.
So it is indeed true that this trip ticked the box on all 50 states. And I'm so grateful to be here with you. I'm also grateful to be here with Kevin, who's been a longtime friend in the industry. Back when, before we were American Clean Power, before I get talking here, we were the American Wind Energy Association. And so at that point, Kevin was still at NextEra, but I was at GE. And so Kevin is a real thoughtful thinker, a powerful voice for the industry, and someone who does things the right way. And so I think after I speak for a few minutes, Kevin and I will have a discussion, but one of the things I know that Kevin and I will talk about, because we talked a little bit about it last night at dinner, is doing things the right way. And so I'll look forward to that discussion later, but I couldn't be in better hands with Kevin. So as Kevin said, I lead our advocacy nationally at American Clean Power, and that involves also what we do at a state and local level as well. So, and how we resource that, how we show up, what our message is, who we partner with, that's all part of our portfolio. And so I think, first again, thank you for allowing me to be here. This is a tremendous conference. I think someone told me, I think this is year 17, if I'm not mistaken. So clearly, Nebraska is showing great leadership in the Midwest and the journey toward clean energy development and deployment. So ACP is proud to have some of our leading members here in attendance with us today, and they're doing important work in the state. I don't want to forget anybody, so I'm going to actually read this list. NextEra, Invenergy, RWE, AES, National Grid Renewables, and Ørsted. So thank you to them for their leadership and what they're doing here in the state as well. And so while we grapple with some of the most pressing issues of our time, the clean energy industry is tasked with the responsibility to shift the way we think about how we generate and deliver power. It's a critical moment for all of us, not just for our industry, but for every economic sector in this country and communities across the nation. The shift is complex, and at many times it's messy, but it's kind of a remarkable sight. The United States is in the midst of an energy boom, and you all are a key part of that. ACP and its members are bringing together communities and policymakers at all levels of government to build clean infrastructure in a meaningful way. These efforts are paying off. We're helping to rapidly decarbonize our power system and assisting other sectors of the economy in doing the same. Clean energy now provides more than 283 gigawatts of clean power capacity across the U.S., enough to power more than 70 million homes. We are working to further that progress. Just last quarter, clean energy broke a second quarter record now. There's many, many records, but this is numerous. This is notable. Last quarter, the second quarter, excuse me, we added 11 gigawatts of utility-scale solar, wind, and energy storage projects. That's incredible. Just to compare it to the second quarter of 2023, that's a 91% increase. So the industry is really hitting its stride. We're seeing a large infusion of investment in the industry. In the last 2 years, over $500 billion of capital investment has been announced for utility-scale projects in manufacturing facilities. But this can't just be about great talking points or about eye-popping stats. I think the clean energy movement has to engage people and demonstrate the benefits of clean energy in the communities where they live, keeping power affordable and reliable, and also delivering and creating good-paying jobs. Americans deserve stability. When they open their utility bills or turn on their lights, there should be no surprises, no increases in payments, and no power shortages. This is one of our top priorities as both an industry and association, and I know as a broader industry. So as we continue this work to deliver on clean energy's promise, it's important that we realize that we're not merely maintaining the status quo, we're actually advancing the ball. We're improving reliability as an industry, and we're decreasing costs for consumers. And our successes are creating a ripple effect. 98% of clean energy projects are taking place in rural America, helping revitalize communities. Clean energy is the fastest growing source of energy and job creation in the U.S., and is a huge job creation engine. The industry currently provides 483,000 jobs in the U.S. alone. Clean energy is also facilitating an American manufacturing renaissance, and this is a key point I think that's sometimes lost as we get caught up in the day-to-day of delivering projects. The manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. as well. 42 new or expanded manufacturing facilities have come online in just the last 2 years alone. These facilities have created tens of thousands of jobs in local communities. So we're reimagining how we do, how the country approaches the energy question, and clean energy is clearly leading the way. We know that this is, nowhere is this more apparent than at a state and local level. And we're thankful to states like Nebraska who are leading the charge, understanding the true value proposition clean energy represents for its residents and local economies. Nebraska is a leader in the country, currently ranking 12th in the nation in accelerating clean energy deployment. With approximately 3.6 gigawatts of wind, solar, and battery capacity on the grid, the state generates enough clean power to serve approximately 1 in 2 homes in the state, which is a truly remarkable accomplishment. The progress is directly related to Nebraskans understanding the opportunity before them. From attracting business development opportunities to generating extra income for some of its most important industries, including agriculture, the state is setting the stage to realize a sustainable energy future. Already, clean energy has generated over $7 billion of capital investment in the state alone through wind, solar, and energy storage projects. It's delivered over $37 million in extra income to farmers and other private landowners through the form of lease payments. And it's also generated new local tax revenues, nearly, I think, stats if I'm correct, almost $20 million annually, which are going to aid local school districts and governments and local communities. So it's I think it's also about addressing the challenges while we prepare for tomorrow and recognizing that the opportunities that are in front of us. As electricity demand grows from economic growth and the building of facilities such as data centers, it's important not to lose sight of keeping our communities powered and resilient. Nebraska's clean energy development is helping proactively account for this growth, supporting demand for the agribusiness, transportation, and tech sectors. But as always, we need to capitalize on this momentum. There is still work to be done, and threats to our continued success exist. We must be consistent and relentless in how we tell the story of clean energy development and educate those who might oppose us on the true benefits of these resources. And I was fascinating the exercises that you went all through this morning with that panel, and I think we just have to keep telling that message, being consistent, and Kevin and I were talking about this, and maybe even a little different in how we tell it. But I think us communicating our message is breaking through. It's bringing all the stakeholders to the table and addressing concerns over development, what development means for local communities. Many Nebraskans still have concerns over issues such as reliability and affordability. And while industry experts might understand the inherent benefits delivered and how they address these issues, we must ensure clean energy is embraced as a part of the overall solution in the path ahead. Nebraskans understand the importance, like I said, of community support. It's a central tenet of how you do business in the state. A push for development moratoriums in opposition to dedicating land for projects pose significant hurdles to gaining the support needed for continued clean energy growth. These issues are often compounded by uncertainty stemming from a lack of regulatory guidance on local siting and permitting. So even once we've have the projects in the ground, projects have to overcome even more obstacles to complete development and to come online. So, and we see this in communities across the country. It's not unique to Nebraska. Federal policy can help. I think that is certain. We're doing what we can at a federal level to ensure that you have what you need to provide a smooth path for development. And there's a lot of work being done in Washington around many pieces of legislation and regulation. Kevin mentioned some, the Inflation Reduction Act, the things that go into implementing that, some regulations at the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, and some other things happening that are trying to advance the ball to get these projects on the grid. I think one of the most critical issues that we face is the inadequacy of our nation's current transmission system, and hopefully Kevin and I can talk a little bit about that when we do our Q&A here after this. It's outdated and it's incomplete, and it's in need of attention as we rapidly deploy new generation. So building, I would say this again, building new high voltage transmission is essential to deliver on the promise of clean energy. To achieve this, we as an industry are advocating for federal legislation that streamlines the permitting process for transmission in the U.S. And recently, we've seen signs of encouraging progress. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee took a major step forward with a bipartisan vote on the Energy Permitting Reform Act. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to many in the room, but what it does is it's legislation that would provide a clear regulatory pathway for transmission deployment in this country, something we have not had. I think another critical challenge that we face at a national level is how we build strong supply chains, and you all have heard about that. I think you did a little bit of that exercise earlier today. How we provide for affordable domestic products that help procurement for timely deployment. I think ACP is working with policymakers and stakeholders, starting with solar and energy supply chains, to really look at these supply chains and how they're built out, and are they being built out in a way that increases our energy independence. This, coupled with our work on issues such as trade and tariffs, help us ensure that we have a pipeline of equipment while we continue to make strides toward domesticating both our manufacturing and our engineering capacities at home. So ACP works, as we work at a national level, we strive to serve as a resource on the ground here in Nebraska and other states across the country. Our state and community affairs work, teams work daily on this. You heard a little from Hillary. Also here with me is Sarah Cottrell-Probst, who runs our state program. If you don't know Sarah, you should get to know Sarah. The industry is lucky to have her. Most recently, she was the Secretary of Energy and Mineral Resources in New Mexico. She gets it. She speaks the language of the state and local communities. She's engaged in those things, and she's a very strategic thinker. And so get to know Sarah. She's going to be doing good work, not only here, but in other places as well. So this includes, our work in Nebraska includes support for our regional partners and organizations like New Power Nebraska and the Advanced Power Alliance. I think critical to this as well are the tools and resources that we can provide you as you champion your clean energy projects. We understand the challenges that misinformation, we heard a little bit about that this morning, can pose to your success. And we produce a lot of fact sheets and white papers and market reports that can help you build your understanding, but also take that understanding and use it in your advocacy efforts as you try and get your projects in the ground and deal with local decision makers. In short, we're here to support you and to be your partners. I think while there are a lot of challenges, I don't want to just talk about the challenges. The future is bright. I mean, we like to say the future is bright and every day is a crisis. It's kind of how we feel sometimes, and I know you feel that more because you're in the thick of it. But the future, I do really believe the future is bright. And in the conversations I've had around the conference this morning and the panel that I was able to watch and be a part of and listen to, I think Nebraska is a state that's hungry to take advantage of the clean energy opportunities that are before it. So as we move beyond some of these hurdles, we need to just keep our eye on the ball, right? We need to meet the demand reliably, affordably, and securely. And I'm confident we're up to the challenge. So I look forward to continuing to participate with you, and I'm looking forward to a discussion with my friend Kevin. So thank you.
All right, Jesse, great remarks. We've got some time. I'd like to get your thoughts on a variety of topics. So today, we're 2 weeks out from when everybody's going to be racing to the polls, right? We'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the election and its importance for the continued growth of renewables and renewable energy. Do you think it matters who's the president or which party controls the Congress?
Oh, elections always have consequences. I'd be less than, I think, honest if I said otherwise. But I do think there are some important things to remember. Clean energy deployment grew by double digits over each of the last 4 administrations of mixed party. And I think it will continue to grow over the next 4. So I think this is an industry that is on a trajectory of growth, clearly. You all are making that happen. And I think the capital is there and the desire and demand is there. It's just a question of a couple of things. And less election dependent, I would say, than just like really the shoe leather of educating lawmakers. And that's, at a federal level, the problems aren't so dissimilar from what they are at a state and local level, which is how do you get the projects in the ground faster is thing one. And the other thing I think that is something that we are increasingly focused on is how do we build out transmission infrastructure in this country? How do we connect the dots of a balkanized system to really be able to move large amounts of power from generation to load? And so those 2 things are certainly not election dependent, but I think are also things in this era of explosive demand growth. It's something that kind of transcends political party. So everybody, there are national security imperatives around making sure that we're energy secure and energy independent, but also national security imperatives of making sure that we are not ceding the AI race to other foreign actors and things like that. And so while all of that's happening here, you all are an essential part of that story and the success of that story. So I guess that's my long answer for saying there will be some fits and starts depending on election outcome, but I think we're on a trajectory for growth, and I don't anticipate that this election is going to change that.
That's great to hear. So back in the 90s, the 1990s, right? The raging Cajun James Carville coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." You touched in your remarks on the economic benefits derived from clean energy across the country, yet permitting still becomes a challenge. Why do you think this is?
I think Sarah and Hillary have heard me use this anecdote, so they're going to forgive me for using it again. I have a very good friend who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, or used to, excuse me, and his parents still live there. And about a year ago, we were talking, and he said, "You will not believe this. My mom and dad signed a petition to basically stop Topgolf from coming to Fort Collins." And I think it's just illustrative of this NIMBYism is so pervasive, and it's not just against energy projects, it's just against just everything in general. So I think it is an issue. How do we overcome that? Kevin and I were talking a little bit at dinner last night. There's a lot of ways. I think sometimes it gets so entrenched it's hard. I think for us at a national level and at a state decision maker level, I think national security and energy security are messages that resonate. But at a local level, when you're seeing the project, that it's not always as compelling. I think the economic story is a good one. I also think that does the industry have, stomach's the wrong word, do we have the courage, and would the industry think in some of these places, is there a way to find a way to take back a little bit of local control? So please don't run out of here and say I'm advocating for this, because I know this is a touchy subject. what is the right balance between state control and county control? And I think there are a lot of states trying to figure that out, some better than others, but I think it's a discussion that the industry needs to have with lawmakers and policymakers to figure out how we can crack the code of permitting. Some of it's capacity building. The industry and a lot of outside funders have tried their level best to build capacity in some of these places. A lot of the places where you're seeing that balance, Colorado is an example, I know you all know about this, where they're trying to find that right balance with some Senate bills. A lot of that is kind of funding to local entities, because how do you expect a county commissioner that he or she has so many other issues in a day? Is the school paid for? Do I have fire? Do I have EMS? Do I have whatever? Like, to bring them in and say, hey, you should vote on this really sophisticated project just because we tell you that you should, is tough. And so how do we build capacity, or in some way that's not self-serving, I guess is the wrong word, but so that it's kind of that honest broker approach, maybe a little arm's length. And I think we're all trying to look at creative solutions. That's my really long, we could talk for 2 hours on this. I'm trying to hit the high points, but I really do think at a state level it is, how do we, at a federal level, there's this thing called backstop siting authority we talk about for transmission, where you give an RTO or a state time to act, and if they don't, then the federal government through FERC comes in and says, no, we're going to do it anyway. Like, that's an idea that gets thrown around a lot. Is there some hybrid approach we could look at around the states? But again, please, please, please. And if you're a local official in the room, I'm not in the least bit saying that you don't have an important job or we want to take your power away. I think that how do we find that happy middle ground? And I think we haven't found it in a lot of places just yet.
You mentioned at the beginning of your remarks, do the right thing,
Yes.
right? Nextera is a company, value-based company, right? And one of the 3 values is do the right thing. Do the right thing can mean different things to different people, right? But I think do the right thing can mean different things to different people, right? But I think most in the room would say at a minimum, it's proper siting, it's being a good neighbor in the community. Curious if you agree, and would be interested in hearing how you think the industry is doing.
I think we're doing better. We're not perfect. I think do the right thing means a lot of different things to a lot of people, I think I'm not telling you anything you don't know. On the wind side, the developers are usually larger, a little more sophisticated. The projects are harder. On the solar side, sometimes, at least in the past, it's been, especially as we're going to talk, I think, later about Q reform, solar's been a little bit of a different story with a little more checkered past. But I do think it's about doing the right thing, and those are some basic blocking and tackling. And as you know, it's like, I think we could talk about setbacks and those types of things and how you do it. But I think it's more than that. It's how do we show up as an industry in communities? Are we there longer term? Are we? Someone this morning was talking about, am I bringing my operations manager to the county zoning meeting? Am I showing up? Am I sponsoring Little League? When you talk, you've had these discussions at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, and I think they all tell the same story, which is rural communities need, you have to be a partner. They have to believe that you're there for them and not just for you. And so one of those ways is how you tell your story. Like, do they understand that you get to have a local hospital and not a clinic because there's a project in the place? Do they understand that the library's there, or there's a Little League field, or there's any of 100 examples which you all know much better of because you're the authors of those examples. But I think it is genuinely showing up beyond just we execute the project and we move on. How do we continue to be good stewards in the community and be partners in the community?
So, like the Nebraska Renewables Conference, I've been in the industry 17 years this year. And it's the first time where we see really unprecedented growth and, more demand for electricity. For like the first 15 years I was doing this, renewables was replacing something else. It was a more cost-effective solution to running a old coal plant or a inefficient gas plant. But with the electrification of oil and gas, data centers, onshoring and more manufacturing, we've seen that growth really just skyrocket.
It's incredible.
Is the industry ready for all this growth?
We like to say we're moving fast, but not nearly fast enough. And I think some quarters of our industry, you all are ready to deploy. It is. I think as we look across supply chain and think about the need to domesticate more of our supply chain, clearly stable markets bring that kind of investment because you can scale and you have the belief, if you're a manufacturer, that you're going to have customers that are going to buy your stuff for over a long period of time. I think that's important. And I think you're starting to see more and more of our supply chain come domestic. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But I do think we are ready as an industry. I think there are some things that do get in the way, though. And I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to be on message, which is siting and permitting is a problem and transmission. So how do we get to the place where you all can develop your projects kind of in line with your community partners, get those things up, get through the queue, get those electrons to load. And that is where I think is our next challenge, the biggest challenges in industry. But I do think that the industry is ready to deploy. I think you're there, you're capitalized. Like, it's not an issue of if, but when. And I think, to your point, this explosive growth has been good for us on many fronts, not the least of which is the political front, because it used to just be the avoided cost bill, as you said when we started. We used to have these discussions in the AWEA days, which was we were just beating the avoided cost of gas. It's not what it is anymore. It's like, holy cow, we need everything we can and we need it fast. And I think, we're obviously fans of zero carbon solutions, but I think there's a lot of effort and intention around moving the needle on some of these issues that are impeding the clean energy industry. And I think that we're going to make progress.
So that's a great segue to the next question, right? Two issues that are impeding renewables. You mentioned interconnect. We've heard a lot about permitting. What is ACP doing to help mitigate the impact that those two have on the deployment of clean energy?
So we've spent on the siting side. We're trying to crack the code with you. I mean, every state is so different. Are we investing time and resources with other? There's this whole other universe that I've been involved with here for the last many years of climate funders. So people that are way more into the climate change and saying it than we are as a business trade association, right? Where we have to really thread a needle there at a national level. But they are building out these networks. And so are these networks, how do we as an industry help them do the right thing, be in the right places, show up in the right way? And Hillary is working with a lot. I know Stephen, is he in the audience? Stephen Gooden, who we've engaged with at NextEra a fair amount. Like, others in the industry are really focused on what's the message we're telling. And I think as well, are there opportunities to play offense in some states with permitting legislation? So we're looking at that as well. At a federal level, we are super invested in the transmission piece. I think it goes without saying, how do we move an industry if we can't get our stuff to market, right? And that's literally what's happening. Right, we can't. You all are making these projects, and especially in parts of SPP and SPP South, it's just you just might as well turn the turbine and run into the ground, or you're being curtailed, right? So, or you can't get your product to the market, and so we've really focused on this transmission piece. I think what's happening in the Senate right now is real. In the U.S. Senate with this Manchin-Barrasso legislation, so 2 U.S. senators, one from each side of the aisle. An overwhelming committee vote, which had people on the far left and members on the far right voting for it, kind of working through the process. I think that's a real clear signal. I think that will continue to work its way through the process, and we'll see where we get at the end of the year. It also has oil and gas provisions in it, so for LNG export and some of these other things. So there's enough in there to want to bring many people to the dance. And I think that there's a chance we can get something over the finish line by the end of the year.
You rattled off a bunch of impressive stats, right? And, Nebraska is reaping the benefits of renewables. What is it that other states can take from the Nebraska playbook to get their fair share?
I've always admired the nameplate capacity tax, or I don't know if that's the right term for it, in Nebraska. I think it's innovative and it's been around a long time. I also think you have utilities that have voluntarily stepped up to and been kind of early adopters of clean. And I think other states can take some from that. I think there's some sales tax issues, I think, as you guys work through procurement for clean projects that are also innovative. But I think, just being willing to think outside the box and not view kind of, sometimes we go into, when you all experience this, when you go into states, we're almost seen as an invading army, right? We're different, we're bringing different stuff. But I think that there is this ability for us to take what's happened in other states, Nebraska included, and try and take those best practices other places. Like I said, I think the tax approach is innovative. I know it doesn't supplant real property tax, but I think doing some of that nameplate stuff, I think, is something that, as we talk, we might think about doing in other places, especially in places where we're constantly facing into, if I'm in Oklahoma or I'm in Wyoming or some of these other places where we're constantly facing into different tax ideas. Like, why couldn't we just take something that's been on the books somewhere else as a best practice? But again, that takes buy-in from the whole industry, right? Because it's not just one or two or three developers, it's an entire industry that's subject to that. And a lot of times that push and pull is difficult as well internally for us.
So you've been around the industry for a while.
Long time.
What keeps you up at night today?
I just don't think we're moving fast enough. I really don't. And I think one thing that this transmission stuff is real. The constraints are real. And I think they're so real, and it's become such an issue that I honestly, it's kind of the utility ships even started to turn, which is, when that happens, that's a real moment. And we have utility members and we love utilities. So if there are utilities in the room, I'm all for utilities. I just think that utility ship has kind of started to turn. And I think on this transmission idea and the need for more transmission, I think it's a lot of the same fights. I think it's just a more constructive engagement in those fights around planning, around cost allocation, around what do you do in the unorganized West? What do you do in the Southeast where there's no markets? How do you deal with RTOs? And I think that really keeps me up. I think, because I think if we don't solve that issue, that the curtailment problems obviously are just going to get worse. I think the other thing that keeps me up, a little bit is just a little of the continued uncertainty at a federal level around some of the guidance, for lack of a better term, the regulations that go into implementing some of your tax incentives, right? There's still some uncertainty there. We're about ready to change an administration, and regardless of who comes in, whether it be a Trump administration or a Harris administration, there's a lot of education that has to go on, and that means delay, and that's not something you guys need. You want certainty so that you can keep investing in these projects. So I'd say those are two things. We're just not moving fast enough, and regardless of the outcome of this next election, there's going to be a lag in time for putting all the people in the right places to do the types of things that need to be done to keep this industry humming.
So from when you've started, back in the GE days to today, what's the biggest thing that surprised you about the industry?
I think it's just how it doesn't feel fast, but I, as a young lawyer in San Diego, I did some of the early Iberdrola wind projects out in the Palm Desert. So I partner in my law firm in San Diego, had that account, and I remember in the 90s working on some of that stuff and thinking, how crazy it was. They were kilowatt machines. They weren't even megawatt machines at the time. How crazy it was that someone could make this thing that could catch the wind like that and generate power. To today, it feels a little bit like as we've come down the cost curve and really made this a real kind of cost competitive enterprise, it feels a little bit like the fracking boom in a little bit, I would say, where we had this resource, we figured out how to use it. It feels like we've figured out how to use clean energy. I think there clearly are some things that still need to happen. We need to get beyond that 4 or 6 hour battery in a cost effective way, and a lot of people are working on that. We need to solve this transmission thing. We need to continue to encourage local communities to embrace us. But like the thing that I think surprises the most is like how fast and how big this has gotten. And like it surprises me in a good way. I'm heartened by it because I think it's important. And I think what you all are doing is important, and what we're doing together is important. And it's good for our kids. I felt, David, when you said your parents had 8, I take my hat off to you. We have 3 and we barely make it some days. But I mean, it's important for the next generation. It is. You're doing meaningful work, and I can't believe how fast the industry's progressed.
And, the volume of projects that are out there and the number of landowners and communities that are being impacted by those projects. That, to me, is the great piece of this.
You guys are part of I think the last number we had at the end of last year was 170 gigawatts of pipeline. That's incredible. I mean, we were talking at dinner last night. We've got to figure out the queue situation, and PJM's talking about letting nuclear leapfrog, and other MISO might freeze the queue, and so it's not without its issues, right? But at the end of the day, this industry has gotten. We're now, it's not niche anymore, right? And I think when I first met you in the early 2010s, it might have felt like that. It's not anymore. We're a material part of the generation stack in this country. They need us. They need more of us, right? And so I'm ready. I'm encouraged. I have been. It's why I stay where I am. It's why I get up every day, and it's why I'm here. I think it's important.
All right, so last question.
Sure.
JC was king for the day. What would you change to facilitate growth of renewables?
I think we got
What's
to.
the silver bullet in your eyes?
I think as much as transmission, I think we got to figure out the state issue, the state permitting issue, like how we deal with the state local dynamic around permitting. I really do think that that's a thing that it's going to. If we don't figure it out, it's going to become increasingly a bigger problem for us together in advancing the industry.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have for JC. Appreciate everybody's attention, and enjoy the rest of the content.
Thank you for having me.